The town of Ridgewood had always been the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen. It sat quietly between long highways and empty fields, forgotten by most maps and news channels. People there trusted each other. Doors were often left unlocked. Children rode their bicycles until sunset, and neighbors waved without suspicion. It was the kind of town where parents believed their children were safe. On that spring morning, the sun rose gently over the rooftops, painting the streets with soft golden light. Birds chirped from telephone wires, and a cool breeze moved through the trees lining the sidewalks. Everything felt calm, familiar, and ordinary. Inside a small blue house at the edge of Ridgewood, 8-year-old Evan Cole sat at the kitchen table, swinging his legs beneath his chair. He was small for his age, with dark eyes that always looked thoughtful, as if he was quietly observing the world instead of rushing through it. His hair stuck up in uneven waves, no matter how often his mother tried to smooth it down. Laura Cole stood by the counter, pouring milk into a bowl of cereal. She had not slept well. She rarely did these days. Still, she forced a smile as she placed the bowl in front of her son. "Eat up," she said gently. "You don't want to miss the bus." Evan stared into the bowl without touching his spoon. His face looked pale, and his shoulders were tense. Laura noticed, as she often did, that something about her son felt different lately. He had grown quieter, more distant. He used to talk endlessly about school, about his drawings, about the strange dreams he had at night. Now, his answers were short. Sometimes, he said nothing at all. "Are you feeling sick?" Laura asked. Evan shook his head slowly. "I'm fine." His voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper. Laura watched him for a moment, then turned away. She told herself she was imagining things. Children changed all the time. He was growing up. That was all. Mark Cole, Evan's father, was asleep in the bedroom down the hall. He had come home from his night shift at the warehouse just before sunrise. The sound of his steady breathing drifted faintly through the house. Mark worked long hours. He was tired most of the time. Laura had learned not to wake him unless it was necessary. The kitchen clock read 7:20 a.m. Evan finally picked up his spoon and took a few slow bites. He kept glancing toward the front door, as if expecting someone to knock. Laura noticed but said nothing. When he finished, Laura helped him into his jacket and zipped it up to his chin. She knelt in front of him, adjusting the straps of his backpack. Inside were his books, his lunch, and a small notebook he carried everywhere. He never told anyone what he wrote in it. "Stay close to the other kids," she said, brushing his hair from his eyes, "and come straight home after school." Evan nodded. He always nodded. But that morning, he didn't smile back at her. At 7:40, they stepped outside. The air smelled like fresh grass and distant rain. The street was quiet except for the sound of another child laughing somewhere down the block. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away, a short walk past a row of identical houses and a tall wooden fence. Laura walked with Evan, holding his hand tightly. She told herself she was being overprotective, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling in her chest. Evan's hand felt cold in hers. "Mom," Evan said suddenly. "Yes." He hesitated. "What if I don't come back today?" Laura stopped walking. She turned to face him, forcing a laugh that sounded too sharp in the quiet morning. "Don't say silly things," she said. "Of course you'll come back." Evan looked at the ground. "Okay." They reached the corner where Laura usually stopped. From there, Evan could see the bus stop at the end of the street. A few children were already standing there, talking and laughing. Everything looked normal. Laura knelt and hugged Evan tightly. He hugged her back, harder than usual. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Evan replied. She watched him walk away, his backpack bouncing lightly with each step. He turned once and waved. Laura waved back and waited until he reached the corner before turning around. That was the last time she ever saw her son. 10 minutes later, Laura stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window. She replayed Evan's words in her head. "What if I don't come back today?" The sentence echoed in her mind, growing louder with each passing second. She checked the clock again. 7:55 a.m. The bus should have come by now. Laura told herself to calm down. Sometimes the bus was late. Sometimes Evan stayed behind to talk to friends. She tried to distract herself by washing dishes, but her hands trembled. At 8:10, her phone rang. It was the school. "Evan Cole hasn't arrived," the woman on the line said. "Is everything okay?" Laura felt her stomach drop. "He left for school," she said quickly. "He always does." She hung up and rushed outside, her heart pounding. She walked quickly toward the bus stop, scanning the street for any sign of Evan. His red backpack, his small frame, anything. When she reached the bus stop, it was empty. No children, no bus, no Evan. Laura's breath caught in her throat. She looked around wildly. Then she saw it. Evan's backpack was resting against the wooden fence, placed upright, as if someone had set it down carefully. The zipper was closed. The straps were neatly arranged. It looked untouched. Laura dropped to her knees. She called Evan's name again and again, her voice breaking as it echoed through the quiet street. Neighbors stepped outside their homes, drawn by the sound of her screams. Someone called the police. Someone else tried to comfort her, but Laura couldn't feel anything except fear. When the police arrived, they searched the area immediately. They walked the route Evan took every morning. They checked yards, alleys, and empty houses. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken fence. Nothing out of place. It was as if Evan had stepped out of the world. As the sun climbed higher, the entire town gathered near the bus stop. Parents clutched their children closer. Officers asked questions over and over. Laura repeated the same answers, her voice numb. He walked to the bus stop. He never came back. By nightfall, searchlights cut through the woods, and dogs traced every possible scent. Volunteers searched until their legs ached and their voices went hoarse. But there was no trace of Evan Cole. The morning that had begun like any other ended in darkness, and the mystery of the missing child had just begun. The days following Evan Cole's disappearance felt unreal to the people of Ridgewood. Time seemed to stretch and twist, turning hours into long, painful waits. The town that once felt safe and predictable was now filled with fear and suspicion. Every unfamiliar sound caused heads to turn. Every stranger became a possible threat. Police cars lined the streets near the Cole house. Officers came and went at all hours, their serious faces a constant reminder that Evan was still missing. News vans arrived from nearby cities, their cameras pointed toward the quiet blue house that had suddenly become the center of a nightmare. Laura Cole barely slept. When she did, she dreamed of Evan standing just out of reach, calling her name. She woke up each time with her heart racing, convinced for a moment that she had heard his voice. Her home no longer felt like a place of comfort. Every room reminded her of what was missing. Detectives questioned her again on the second day. They sat across from her at the kitchen table, notebooks open, voices calm but firm. Laura answered every question the same way she had before. She woke Evan up. She made him breakfast. She walked him part of the way to the bus stop. She watched him leave. Nothing unusual happened. Nothing felt wrong until it was too late. Some officers believed her completely. Others noticed how carefully she chose her words, how she avoided eye contact when certain questions were asked. They reminded themselves that grief affected everyone differently. Mark Cole returned home after being questioned at the warehouse where he worked. He looked exhausted, his eyes red and hollow. He had not been home when Evan disappeared, something that made him both less suspicious and deeply guilty. He kept saying the same thing over and over, as if repeating it might make it true. If only he had taken the day off. If only he had walked Evan to the bus stop himself. The police searched the Cole house from top to bottom. Drawers were opened, closets emptied, the backyard dug through carefully. Nothing suggested Evan had been hurt there. There were no hidden rooms, no stains, no signs of panic. Just a child's bedroom frozen in time, toys still on the floor, drawings taped to the wall. As the investigation expanded, Officers began knocking on every door in the neighborhood. They spoke to parents, teachers, shop owners, and children. Everyone had a story, but none of them led anywhere. Most neighbors described Evan as quiet and polite. Some said he kept to himself. Others remembered him sitting alone during recess, drawing in his notebook. Then the rumors began. Someone claimed Mark had a bad temper. Another neighbor said Laura argued loudly with Evan late at night. A woman across the street whispered that she had once heard crying coming from the house. None of these claims could be proven, but they spread quickly, growing darker with each retelling. The police could not ignore the rumors. They interviewed Evan's teachers, who described him as shy but intelligent. One teacher mentioned that Evan sometimes looked frightened when adults raised their voices. Another recalled that he had once asked strange questions about running away and starting over somewhere new. That detail caught the detectives' attention. They asked Laura about it. She looked surprised, then defensive. She said Evan had an active imagination. He liked stories. He asked questions like any other child. Her voice shook as she spoke, and tears filled her eyes. She begged them to keep looking outside the family, to focus on strangers. That was when the police widened their search. A background check revealed that a registered offender lived 3 streets away. His name appeared in the system almost immediately. Officers arrived at his home within hours, search warrant in hand. The neighborhood watched from behind curtains as police searched the property. The man cooperated fully. His house was messy but ordinary. No child's belongings were found. No evidence linked him to Evan. He was released the same day. The tension in Ridgewood grew heavier. Volunteers organized search parties, combing the woods, fields, and abandoned buildings surrounding the town. Posters with Evan's face covered every surface. His dark eyes seemed to follow people wherever they went, silently asking for help. On the 5th day, a small break appeared. An elderly woman named Mrs. Harper came forward. She lived near the bus stop and claimed she had seen Evan that morning. According to her, he was not alone. He was standing near the fence, talking to a man she did not recognize. Mrs. Harper couldn't describe the man's face clearly. Her eyesight was poor, and she had only glanced out the window briefly. But she remembered his jacket. A dark green coat, worn and slightly too big. That detail changed everything. Detectives returned to the bus stop and searched again, this time with renewed focus. They questioned everyone who owned a similar jacket. The town felt smaller now, tighter. People looked at each other differently. Trust began to break down. Among the names that surfaced was Daniel Frost. Daniel was a quiet handyman in his late 30s. He took small jobs around Ridgewood, fixing fences, repairing sheds, painting garages. He didn't have close friends. He didn't attend community events. Most people only knew him by sight, not by conversation. Several neighbors recalled seeing Daniel near the bus stop before, though none could say for certain that he had been there that morning. When police went to question him, they found his rented house empty. Daniel Frost had left town. His landlord said Daniel packed his belongings quickly the day after Evan disappeared. He paid cash, said nothing, and left no forwarding address. His phone went straight to voicemail. His bank account showed unusual activity. Large cash withdrawals made shortly before he vanished. Suddenly, the town had a suspect. Police issued alerts and shared Daniel's photo with nearby departments. News stations labeled him a person of interest. His quiet life was torn open and exposed to the world. Laura clung to this new lead with desperate hope. She convinced herself that Daniel was responsible, that a stranger had taken her son. It was the only explanation she could accept. But as days passed, doubts returned. A detective reviewing phone records noticed something strange. Laura's phone had connected to a cell tower near the bus stop around the same time Evan disappeared. According to her statement, she should have already been home by then. When asked about it, Laura said she must have gone back outside briefly. She couldn't remember. Her mind had been foggy that morning. Grief, she said, made memories unreliable. The detectives exchanged quiet glances. Meanwhile, Mark grew increasingly angry. He felt watched, judged, whispered about. He blamed the police for focusing too much on the family and not enough on Daniel Frost. The stress drove a wedge between him and Laura. They argued late into the night, voices rising, doors slamming. The smiling family everyone thought they knew began to crack. As the investigation continued, one truth became clear. Ridgewood was no longer just searching for a missing child. It was searching for the truth beneath its own friendly surface. And the deeper the police dug, the more they realized that someone was hiding something. Whether it was a stranger, a neighbor, or someone much closer to Evan, the secret was buried deep, and it was only a matter of time before it surfaced. The disappearance of Daniel Frost changed the case in a way no one in Ridgewood expected. Until then, fear had been spread evenly across the town, touching every home and every face. But now, that fear had a direction. It had a name. Daniel Frost was no longer just a quiet handyman. He was a shadow moving just out of reach, a man who might hold the answer to what happened to Evan Cole. Detectives retraced Daniel's life carefully. They learned he had arrived in Ridgewood almost 7 years earlier, with no family and no clear past. He had paid rent in cash, worked for himself, and moved from job to job without forming close relationships. Nothing about him stood out at first glance, yet everything about him now felt suspicious. His house was searched thoroughly. Inside, officers found only basic furniture and tools. There were no photographs, no personal letters, no signs of a meaningful connection to anyone. It was as if Daniel had lived his life prepared to disappear at any moment. But the most troubling discovery came from a neighbor. The woman said she had once seen Evan talking to Daniel weeks before the disappearance. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Daniel was known around town, and Evan often watched people work with curiosity. But now, the memory felt different. Dangerous. Police began to believe Daniel had been watching Evan for some time. With no clear destination, detectives turned to Daniel's phone records. His last signal came from a bus station nearly 200 miles away. Officers rushed there, hoping they might still find him. Daniel was gone. What they did find was worse. Inside a rented locker at the station was an old phone, powered off, and a folded piece of paper. It was a child's drawing. The image showed a small house, a tall man, and a boy holding hands. Above them was a shaky sentence written in uneven letters. He said, "I will be safe." The paper was sent back to Ridgewood immediately. When Laura Cole saw the drawing, she collapsed. She recognized it without hesitation. Evan had drawn in that style since he was 5 years old. The way he pressed too hard with the pencil. The way his letters leaned slightly to the left. It was unmistakable. The town reacted with shock and anger. People demanded answers. News headlines grew darker, louder, more accusing. Daniel Frost was officially named the prime suspect. But even as suspicions centered on Daniel, the evidence didn't fully make sense. The bus station footage showed Daniel alone. No child was seen with him. No witnesses remembered a boy traveling with a man matching Daniel's description. It was as if Evan had vanished before ever reaching that place. The drawing raised more questions than it answered. Who had placed it in the locker? Why abandon it instead of destroying it? And if Daniel had taken Evan, why leave behind the only thing that connected him to the crime? As investigators pushed deeper, they uncovered another unsettling detail. The motel logo on the drawing paper traced back to a rundown roadside motel on the edge of Ridgewood. When police checked the records, Daniel Frost's name did not appear. Laura Cole's did. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detectives returned to the Cole house, this time with sharper questions and colder expressions. Laura tried to explain. She admitted she had stayed at the motel the night before Evan disappeared. She said she needed space, that her marriage was falling apart, that she had felt overwhelmed and desperate. Mark Cole learned this information from the police, not from his wife. The betrayal cut deep. Laura insisted the motel stay had nothing to do with Evan. She claimed she had returned home early in the morning and followed her usual routine. But phone records showed a device moving between locations that didn't match her story. Her timeline began to collapse under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Mark became increasingly distant and angry. He refused to believe Laura could be involved, yet he couldn't ignore the evidence piling up around her. He alternated between defending her and accusing her, sometimes within the same conversation. Their grief turned into blame. The town watched as the once quiet family unraveled publicly. Neighbors whispered again, but this time with purpose. Old arguments were remembered. Moments once dismissed were now viewed through a darker lens. Yet even with Laura under suspicion, Daniel Frost remained at the center of the mystery. A former employer came forward, claiming Daniel had once spoken about children being easier to understand than adults. Another person recalled him asking strange questions about school schedules and bus routes. These details painted a disturbing picture. But still, nothing directly proved he had taken Evan. Then came the call that changed everything. A truck driver reported seeing a man matching Daniel's description near a rest stop late at night, just days after the disappearance. According to the driver, the man was alone, pacing nervously, constantly looking over his shoulder. When approached, he walked away quickly and vanished into the darkness. Search teams were sent to the area, but again, Daniel slipped through their fingers. The case began to feel cursed. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. Every lead ended the same way. No bodies, no witnesses, no clear answers. And then, another disturbing discovery emerged. A forensic analyst re-examining the drawing noticed something unusual. Beneath the visible image were faint impressions, marks pressed into the paper from previous writing. Using special lighting, they uncovered fragments of words. "I didn't tell Mom. I had to go," he promised. The messages suggested Evan had been planning something, that the disappearance might not have been sudden or forced, but prepared. When Laura was shown the findings, she went silent. Her face drained of color. She stared at the words for a long time before whispering that Evan had been acting differently for weeks, that he had secrets, that he talked about someone who listened to him. She claimed she didn't know who that person was. But detectives were no longer sure they believed her. They questioned whether Evan had been manipulated, convinced to leave willingly. And if so, who helped him? Daniel Frost alone, or someone closer? The idea that Evan may have trusted his disappearance shook everyone involved. It suggested a deeper betrayal, one that went beyond a stranger in a green jacket. The public pressure intensified. Police were accused of failing. The media speculated wildly. Some believed Daniel Frost was a predator who vanished into a new life. Others believed Laura had lost control of the truth and hidden something unforgivable. Between these theories stood one painful fact. Evan Cole was still missing. And so was the man who might explain why. As winter settled over Ridgewood, the case grew colder. But the questions burned hotter than ever. Somewhere, someone knew what happened that morning. And whoever it was had gone to great lengths to make sure the truth stayed buried. By the time winter arrived in Ridgewood, the case of Evan Cole had stopped feeling like an investigation and started feeling like an open wound. The town moved forward on the surface, but beneath the routines and polite greetings, fear and doubt lived quietly in every home. No one trusted the calm anymore. Snow covered the streets where Evan once walked to school. The bus stop stood empty, the wooden fence behind it now cracked and weathered. The posters with Evan's face had faded, torn by wind and rain, but no one could bring themselves to remove the last few still hanging near the corner. They had become part of the town's landscape, a reminder that something precious had been lost and never replaced. Inside the police department, the case files grew thicker, but the answers remained thin. Laura Cole was called in again. This time, the interview was different. The detectives no longer spoke gently. They placed phone records, maps, and timelines on the table between them. Each page showed a version of events that didn't match Laura's story. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the surface of the table. They asked her about Evan's behavior in the weeks before he disappeared. At first, she repeated what she had always said, that he was quiet, that he was thoughtful, that nothing felt wrong. But the detectives pressed harder, pointing out the hidden messages in the drawing, the strange questions Evan had asked at school, the notebook he carried everywhere. Finally, Laura's composure cracked. She admitted Evan had changed. Her voice trembled as she spoke, describing how Evan had become distant, how he flinched at sudden noises, how he often stared out the window as if waiting for someone. She said he talked about a secret place, somewhere safe, somewhere far away. At the time, she said, she thought it was imagination. Now, she wasn't so sure. She confessed that the night before Evan disappeared, she had argued with Mark. The fight was louder than usual. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. Evan had heard everything. That was why she went to the motel, she explained. Not to abandon her son, but to clear her head, to calm herself before things got worse. The detectives listened carefully, but something still didn't sit right. If Laura knew Evan was struggling, why hadn't she told anyone? Why hadn't she kept him home that day? Why had she changed her story so many times? When asked these questions, Laura had no clear answers. Mark Cole was questioned separately. By now, he barely resembled the man he once was. His face looked older, heavier. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and his hands shook when he spoke. He admitted the marriage had been tense. He admitted he sometimes raised his voice. But he denied ever harming Evan or encouraging him to run away. Mark believed someone had taken advantage of his son's fear. He believed Evan had been manipulated. But when detectives asked him who might have done that, Mark had no answer. Then came the discovery that reignited the town's hope and horror at the same time. A group of hunters walking through the woods several miles outside Ridgewood found something unusual beneath a large oak tree. It was small and partially buried, wrapped in leaves and dirt. When one of them brushed it clean, his heart sank. It was a child's shoe. Evan's shoe. The woods were sealed off immediately. Search teams returned with shovels, dogs, and forensic equipment. The ground was examined inch by inch. Every tree, every hollow, every patch of disturbed soil was investigated. The town waited. Hours passed. Then days. Nothing else was found. No second shoe. No clothing. No signs of a struggle. No remains. The shoe itself offered few answers. There were no clear marks, no traces of blood, no indication of how it got there. It had been placed gently, almost deliberately, beneath the tree. Some officers believed it was meant to be found. The discovery split public opinion in Ridgewood. One side believed the shoe proved Evan was dead and that someone was cruelly taunting the town. Another side believed it was a sign Evan had been there alive, perhaps leaving a trail. Hope and despair twisted together, making it impossible to tell one from the other. Laura broke down completely after the shoe was identified. She screamed that Evan was still alive, that he had to be. Mark, on the other hand, grew silent. He stopped speaking to the press. He avoided neighbors. His grief turned inward, becoming something heavy and dangerous. The police considered a new possibility. What if Evan had left willingly? What if the shoe was a message, not evidence of violence? This theory led them back to Evan's notebook, which had been found in his bedroom weeks earlier but never fully examined. Page after page was filled with drawings, half-written sentences, and strange symbols. At first glance, it looked like a child's imagination at work. But now, viewed through a different lens, it felt like preparation. Evan had drawn maps. Not detailed ones, but shapes that resembled roads, trees, and buildings. Some pages mentioned leaving early. Others mentioned not telling anyone. The most disturbing part was how calm the writing felt. There was no fear in the words. No panic. Only certainty. The idea that Evan may have trusted whoever led him away was almost too painful to accept. The investigation turned cold again as months passed without progress. Daniel Frost remained missing. Laura and Mark separated, unable to live under the weight of shared suspicion and unresolved grief. Their house was sold. New people moved in, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Years went by. The case was officially labeled unsolved, but detectives never fully let it go. Every so often, a tip would come in. A sighting in another state. A man who looked like Daniel Frost. a young adult who resembled Evan. Each lead ended the same way, fading into disappointment. Ridgewood changed. Children were no longer allowed to walk alone. Doors were locked. Trust was replaced by caution. The town had learned, in the hardest way possible, that danger did not always announce itself. Still, the truth refused to settle into any single explanation. If Daniel Frost was responsible, where did he go? And why leave clues behind? If Laura knew more than she admitted, why never confess? And if Evan left willingly, how could an 8-year-old vanish so completely? The truth didn't fit neatly into any theory. It hovered in the space between guilt and innocence, between accident and design. A puzzle missing its most important pieces. As the years passed, the question remained the same. Was Evan taken from Ridgewood, or did he leave it behind forever, guided by a promise that was never meant to be kept? No one knew, and that uncertainty became the most painful truth of all. 20 years after Evan Cole vanished, Ridgewood barely resembled the town it once was. New roads cut through old neighborhoods. The school Evan never reached had been rebuilt, painted bright and modern, its halls filled with children who had never heard his name. Most of the people who remembered that terrible morning had either moved away or grown old, carrying a quiet ache they never spoke about. But some wounds never heal. They only wait. At the far edge of town stood the old roadside motel, abandoned for more than a decade. Its faded sign flickered weakly whenever the wind blew, and its windows were boarded up with cracked wood. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside, but no one stayed long. The place felt wrong, heavy with silence. One autumn morning, a construction crew arrived to tear it down. The land had been sold, and plans were in place for a shopping center. To most people, it was just another forgotten building being erased. No one expected it to change everything. As workers tore through the walls of what used to be Room 12, one of them struck something solid that didn't sound like wood. Behind the insulation, hidden deep inside the wall, was a metal box sealed with tape and dust. It looked old, untouched, as if someone had carefully placed it there and hoped it would never be found. The foreman called the police. When officers arrived, they opened the box carefully. Inside were several envelopes wrapped in plastic. Time had yellowed the paper, but the writing was still clay. The name on the first envelope stopped everyone cold. Evan Cole. The box was sent to the station immediately. Detectives who had long since retired were called back in. Younger officers who had only read about the case now stood face to face with something real, something undeniable. The letters were written in a child's handwriting. Each one was dated. The first letter described Evan feeling scared at home. He wrote about loud voices and hiding in his room. He wrote that someone listened to him, someone who understood him when no one else did. Evan didn't write the name, but he described the man as calm and patient, someone who never yelled. The second letter talked about a plan. Evan wrote that he was going somewhere safe, somewhere quiet. He said he was told his parents would be angry at first but would understand later. He believed that if he disappeared, everything would become better. The third letter was harder to read. In it, Evan wrote about doubt. He said he missed his mom. He said he missed his bed and his drawings on the wall. He asked if it was too late to go back. The writing grew shaky toward the end, as if his hand had trembled while writing. The final letter was the shortest. They said I would never be found. The room fell silent as detectives finished reading. The discovery reopened a case many believed would remain buried forever. News spread quickly. Ridgewood once again found itself at the center of attention. Cameras returned. Reporters spoke Evan's name out loud for the first time in years. But this time, the story felt different. This time, there were answers. DNA testing confirmed what no one dared to question. The handwriting belonged to Evan. The fingerprints on the letters were his. The box had been hidden shortly after his disappearance, sealed away like a secret too dangerous to reveal. The focus returned to Daniel Frost. Investigators reviewed everything they knew about him with fresh eyes. His past was re-examined using modern databases and technology unavailable years earlier. Slowly, a picture began to form. Daniel Frost was not his real name. Records revealed he had lived under several identities across different states. He had a history of befriending troubled families, offering help, listening quietly, earning trust. In at least 2 other towns, children had disappeared under similar circumstances. In those cases, parents had argued. Children had withdrawn. Then they were gone. But no bodies were ever found. Daniel Frost had vanished each time, leaving behind questions and nothing more. Police now believed Daniel had convinced Evan to leave willingly. He had spoken to him over time, planting ideas carefully, telling him he was unsafe, that leaving was the only way to find peace. He had used Evan's fear and confusion, shaping it into trust. What happened after Evan left Ridgewood remained a mystery. No evidence showed where Daniel went next. No proof existed that Evan survived long after his disappearance. The shoe found in the woods years earlier was now believed to be staged, placed there to confuse investigators and create the illusion of tragedy rather than escape. Laura and Mark Cole were both gone by the time these answers emerged. Laura had died quietly, carrying the weight of suspicion and regret. Mark had passed a few years later, never knowing the truth. Their marriage had ended shortly after Evan's disappearance, broken by grief and unanswered questions. Some in Ridgewood blamed Laura for not seeing the signs. Others blamed Mark for his anger. But many began to see the story differently now. They saw a family already breaking before a stranger slipped into the cracks. The case was officially closed once again, but this time with a new conclusion. Evan Cole was believed to have left Ridgewood alive, manipulated by a man who knew how to disappear. Whether Evan survived beyond that point remained unknown. No remains were ever found. No confirmed sightings. No final proof. Just letters hidden in a wall, waiting patiently for time to uncover them. Today, a small memorial stands near the old bus stop where Evan was last seen. It doesn't say he died. It doesn't say he lived. It simply carries his name and the date he disappeared. People still ask what really happened to Evan Cole. Some believe he escaped and started a new life, growing up under a different name, unaware of how deeply he was missed. Others believe he realized the truth too late, that the promise of safety was a lie, and that his fate was sealed far from home. The letters offer no clear ending, only a child's voice, frozen in time, reminding the world how easily trust can be used as a weapon. The missing child was never found, but his story was. And sometimes, knowing the truth hurts more than never knowing at all.